He didn't even say it like an insult at first. He said it like a diagnosis. Like he was standing over a carton of milk, squinting at the date, then shrugging because he'd already reached for something newer. We were at a restaurant I didn't choose, under lighting too bright for forgiveness, the kind of place where the silverware has weight. And the waiters move like they're afraid of making noise around other people's money. I remember the way my napkin felt stiff-starched, folded into a little triangle that didn't know what kind of mess it was about to witness. He lifted his glass and smiled that smile he practiced in mirrors. Then he looked at me. Right through me and said, "You know, I just feel like you're expired. Like I was bread. Like I was a coupon. Like I was a season of his life he could close out an archive." I sat there with my hands in my lap, fingers interlaced, knuckles calm, 76 years old, and I had learned that when someone tries to humiliate you in public, they are begging you to give them a show tears, shouting, a trembling voice that confirms their power. I didn't give him anything. I just watched his mouth move and thought about how many times that same mouth had said my name at night like it was prayer. 30-5 years. Gone down to one word. Expired. He had already filed everything, already moved his things, already started living like a man who believed the past had no legal claim on him, and across the table close enough that I could smell her perfume and the sweetness of her lip gloss was the new wife, not even a fiancée, a wife, 20-something, bright and polished, like she'd been dipped in ring light and approval. She smiled the whole time, the way young women smile when they think they're watching an ending, not realizing they're standing at the beginning of a storm. Her nails tapped the glass. Her phone sat face up like a fourth person at our table. She kept glancing at it the way people glance at mirrors. Check-in. If the world is still watching. When the waiter asked if we were celebrating something, my ex-husband said, "A new chapter." And she laughed like it was the cleverest thing she'd ever heard. New chapter, and what was I? The old book they threw away. I looked at the menu and pretended to read, because I needed a second to keep my dignity from rising up like bile. My name is Ruthie Caldwell. Most people call me Miss Ruth. I used to be the woman people came to when they needed advice, when they needed somebody to sit with them at the hospital, when they needed a casserole and a prayer and a plan. I raised a son, buried a mother, watched my friends disappear one by one like porch lights going out down the street. I know endings. And I know when someone is trying to turn your pain into their victory lap. That night, I went home alone. Not because I had nowhere to go, because I needed to walk into my own house, hear my own floors creak, smell my own furniture, and remind myself that I was still real. The house was quiet in that heavy way, like it had been holding its breath while I was out. I stood in the entryway and looked at the staircase, the one I had scrubbed on my knees for years. The one my husband used to sit on when he came home late, shoes in his hands, trying not to wake anybody. I ran my palm along the banister, and for a moment I felt like I was touching time itself. Warm wood, old varnish, 1,000 small moments sealed in the grain. Then I saw it. A faint smudge on the third step, like a shoe print that didn't belong to me, and something in my chest tightened. Not fear, not sadness, possession, because whether he respected me or not, whether he loved me or not, the truth was simple. I bought that house, not in the romantic way people say. We built this together. I mean, I signed the papers. I made the payments. I kept the lights on. I stretched my salary like taffy, worked overtime, gave up vacations, wore the same coat for 8 winters. I did the kind of math women do quietly, in the dark, so their children can have a little more in the daylight. My husband was good at being charming, good at being seen, good at letting people believe he was the engine. But I was the engine, I was the hands, I was the backbone. And when the divorce happened, he didn't fight me for the house because he didn't want the dead weight. He said, too many memories, too much responsibility. He wanted a life that came with no history, no obligations, no proof that he'd ever been ordinary. So, he left and I stayed. And I thought that was the end of it. I didn't understand yet that some people don't leave your life because they're done with you. They leave because they think they can come back later and take what you built. It started small. A phone call with false warmth, the way he used to speak when he wanted something and didn't want to admit it. "Ruth," he said, stretching my name like it still belonged to him. "You still in the house?" "Still breathing," I said. My voice didn't even shake. I surprised myself. He laughed short, hollow. "Good. Listen, the market is crazy. Me and Jasmine, we've been thinking, that house has so much equity. We could refinance, live there for a bit, maybe flip it, just until we find something bigger. Keep it in the family. In the family. The nerve, audacity of calling something family, after you've treated your wife like a product you returned. I didn't yell. I didn't bargain. I didn't plead. I just said, no. Silence. Then his tone shifted, softening into that familiar manipulation, the one that used to work when I still thought love meant sacrificing until you disappeared. Come on, Ruth. After everything, you can't help me start over. I could hear her in the background. Not words, just the presence of her, a faint giggle, the click of nails. A life he wanted so badly he was willing to rob mine to afford it. I said, you already started over. Don't try to use my house as your launchpad. I ended the call. The next day, flowers appeared on my porch, big red roses. The kind you send when you want to look noble while you're being cruel. The note said, let's keep it civil. Civil, like I had been the uncivil one. I didn't throw them away. I didn't want to give him the satisfaction of imagining me angry and impulsive. I left them right there on the porch, and every day I watched them droop, the petals curling, the red turning dark like a bruise. It was the most honest thing he'd ever sent me. Then came the visits. They didn't ask. They just arrived, like entitlement had become their GPS. Saturday morning, I was sitting at my kitchen table with coffee, enjoying the kind of peace that comes when you stop trying to fix what broke you. Knock knock knock. I opened the door, and there they were. Fred in his too expensive jacket, trying to look casual like he belonged. Jasmine behind him, dressed like she was stepping onto a set, not onto my porch. Wedge sneakers that made no sense on my wooden steps. Glossy hair, skin to perfect. Eye scanning everything like she was counting square footage. Not respecting a life. She walked right past me like I was a coat rack. Oh wow, she said, stepping into my foyer. It's got potential. Potential. My home where I had rocked babies, where I had sat on the floor crying when my father died, where I had danced barefoot in the kitchen on my anniversary, reduced to potential. She ran her fingers along my wallpaper like she was testing fabric. Kitchen needs a gut, she announced. Bathrooms are tragic. Fred chuckled nervously. She's just passionate, Ruth. She's got an eye. Jasmine smiled at me like she was doing me a favor by tolerating my existence. We'd let you stay for a while, she said, until you find something cozier, more manageable. Cozier. Manageable. Words they use for old dogs and small apartments. Words that sound gentle but mean. Make yourself smaller. Make yourself disappear. I looked at her and felt something settle in me. Not rage, not hysteria. A calm so cold it could preserve meat. I said, of course. Her face lit up. Really? Fred exhaled like he'd won. See, I told you she'd be reasonable. I smiled. And I let them believe it. Because sometimes, you don't fight wolves by screaming in the forest. Sometimes, you build a fence while they're busy celebrating. That night, I made banana pudding. His favorite. Layered it in my grandmother's crystal bowl. Sweet smell filling the kitchen like a memory trying to seduce me back into softness. I didn't make it for him. I made it because I needed to feel my hands do something familiar, while my mind did something new, and when it was done, I stood over the sink and scraped the whole thing into the garbage disposal. Layer by layer. Cream cookies. Bananas. A quiet little funeral for the part of me that still wanted to be chosen. The visits kept coming. They started treating my home like a showroom. Contractors on my lawn. Jasmine pointing at my rose bushes like they were weeds. Talking about skylights, extensions, knocking down walls. Walls I had leaned on when I was tired, walls that had listened to me pray. One afternoon, I walked into my living room and found Jasmine posing in front of my fireplace. Phone held high, lips pursed. Manifesting our dream hearth, she said aloud as she recorded. Can't wait to fill this space with love and laughter. Love and laughter. She said it like a slogan, like the home was a prop for her brand, and then she posted it with my staircase in the background. My staircase. The one she'd soon be standing on in a white robe embroidered with a last name that no longer belonged to me. That's when I knew they weren't just disrespectful, they were planning to erase me. The last straw wasn't shouting, it was a paint swatch. She knocked on my bedroom door, my bedroom holding gray and white swatches like she was holding authority. Ruthie, darling, she said, sweetness so fake it made my teeth ache. Would you mind if we painted the master before the wedding? The light in here is perfect for my getting ready photos. And this color is, you know, dated. Dated. Like my skin, like my life, like my worth. I stared at her, then I smiled. Of course not, I said. Her eyes widened with delight. Oh, thank you. And I added, softly, because this isn't your house to paint. The smile slid right off her face. She blinked like she couldn't compute the idea that something existed that wasn't hers. Fred stepped forward. Now, Ruth, don't start. We talked about this. We didn't talk, I said. You talked? You assumed. You promised her something you don't own. Jasmine's voice got sharp. Fred says a lot. I replied, calm as winter, and most of it is for his benefit. Silence fell heavy. I could hear my own heartbeat, not frantic, steady, like a drum before battle. That night, I called Letitia Maxwell. Letitia was an old friend, the kind of woman who doesn't get loud unless she has to, and when she does, people move. When she answered, she didn't say hello. She said, "Baby, tell me what that man did." I sat on my bed, phone in my hand, and for the first time in months I didn't feel like a woman being pushed around by other people's decisions. I felt like a woman picking up her own pen. "It's time," I said. "Time for what?" she asked. "Time to remind them what ownership means." Letitia exhaled, low and satisfied. "That's what I've been waiting to hear." The next days moved like a quiet operation. No drama, no speeches, just action. Letitia confirmed what I already knew. The deed was in my name, clean and clear. He had no rights. No claim. No, we built this together sentiment that could override paper and law. Then I met with a realtor, a man named Miles, calm and discreet, dressed like professionalism. He didn't ask nosy questions. He didn't look at my furniture like it was his business. He just said, "You want speed and silence." I nodded, "And I want them to learn what it feels like to stand outside a door that isn't theirs." He didn't smile, but his eyes understood. We listed the house quietly, no sign in the yard, no open house circus. A private showing, a family relocating, cash offer, clean close. And when Miles said, "They want to close fast," I didn't even hesitate. "Good," I said, "so do I." We scheduled the closing for the day of their wedding. Not because I needed vengeance, because I needed to be undisturbed, on the morning of their wedding, while they were surrounded by makeup artists and champagne flutes and a whole audience of people pretending this was love. My movers arrived at sunrise. I had already packed what mattered: documents, photos, my mother's curtains folded into a cedar chest, my books, my grandmother's vase, the things that held my story. And before I left, I walked through each room one last time. I didn't cry, not yet. I stood in the doorway of the kitchen and remembered my hands kneading dough on that counter. I remembered my son's homework spread out like a battlefield. I remembered the way the house smelled on Christmas mornings. Then I turned off the lights, locked the door, and walked away. I didn't look back, because looking back is how you get tempted to return to places that no longer deserve you. By noon, the money was wired. The deed transferred, the keys changed hands. The house was no longer mine, which meant it could never be theirs. That night, I stayed in a small boutique hotel with a garden courtyard and soft lamps that didn't judge me. Letitia brought sparkling cider and peach tart, and we sat on the balcony like two women watching the world spin without us having to chase it. "Think they'll find out right away?" she asked. I sipped my drink. "They'll find out when the key doesn't work." And when my phone started ringing the next morning, Fred's number over and over, unknown numbers, my son's name, my body, didn't jump like it used to. I just let it ring. Because silence is a boundary too. 14 missed calls. Then, a knock at my hotel room door. Polite, calculated. I opened the door with the chain still on. Fred stood there in his wedding suit, rumpled like his confidence had slept in it, eyes red, face pale. He held a white envelope like it burned. "You sold the house," he said, voice cracked. "Our house." I looked at him and felt nothing sweet. "My house," I corrected, "as per the divorce, as per the deed, as per reality." His jaw worked like he was chewing pride. "You blindsided us," he whispered. "How could you do this?" I tilted my head. "The way you blindsided me with your new life. The way she walked through my home, measuring my grief with a laser." He flinched. "I never meant to hurt you," he said. "You never meant to honor me either," I replied. He held the envelope out. "Wedding photos. You're in one. In the background." I took it. Then I closed the door, locked it, and I listened to the click like a hymn. Later, in the hotel lobby, I fed those glossy photos to the fireplace, one by one. Jasmine's dress, Fred's grin, their post-happiness on my staircase. Ash, let it all become what it always was. Temporary. Then the internet started doing what the internet does. Jasmine went online crying, telling strangers she'd been robbed, calling me vindictive, calling me old, like age was a crime and boundaries were cruelty. A neighbor posted a clip of her screaming on the new owner's lawn, and in the background you could hear someone say, "Calm as daylight, wait, she owned it the whole time. Sounds like you played yourself." That clip ran through the town like gossip with wings, and I never reposted it, never commented, never defended myself in public, because I didn't need to. I had law, I had paper, I had truth. A few weeks later, my son asked to meet. We sat at a cafe by the lake, the water moving like it didn't care about human drama. He looked tired, older than I remembered, like the truth had finally cost him something too. "Mom," he said, eyes wet, "I didn't know it was like that." I stirred my tea slowly. "You didn't want to know," I said gently, "because knowing would have required choosing." He swallowed hard. "I'm sorry." And I forgave him, not because he deserved it fully, because I deserved not to carry that weight. My new apartment has a corner window and a view of the river that looks like silver ribbon in the morning. There are bookshelves already built into the wall, like the place was waiting for me. Sometimes I sit there in my slippers, the ones Fred called dowdy, and I laugh softly at how freedom feels. It doesn't feel like fireworks. It feels like quiet. It feels like making tea and not checking your phone. It feels like choosing yourself without asking permission. Some nights, music drifts from a neighbor's window, old jazz. The kind that sounds like it knows sorrow but refuses to drown in it. And I sit with my hands around a warm mug, watching the city lights blink on one by one like little witnesses. I think about that word he tried to stamp on me, expired, and I smile, because I finally understand something I wish I'd learned earlier. Men like Fred don't get to decide when a woman is finished. A woman is not a product. A woman is not a season. A woman is a story. And if she's lucky, if she's brave, she gets to write the ending herself. Now when I look in the mirror, I don't see something old and fading. I see something seasoned, weathered, still standing. And I whisper to myself, not as a warning, but as a promise, I am not expiring. I am becoming. The funny thing is, after you take the house out from under people like that, they don't collapse quietly, they thrash, like a fish yanked from water, gasping, offended that air doesn't obey them. For a week, the calls kept coming from different numbers. Some were angry, some were pleading, some were sweet in that fake way that tries to rewrite yesterday, and every time my phone lit up, I felt the same calm settle deeper into my bones, because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't reacting, I was choosing. Letitia told me later that Jasmine had tried to get legal. That's what Letitia called it, like it was a costume someone puts on when they're out of options. She hired a loud attorney with shiny shoes and a loud voice, the kind of man who sells promises more than he wins. Cases. He sent a letter full of words like emotional damages, and verbal agreement and marital expectation. Marital expectation. As if marriage is a coupon code. As if my years were a deposit she could withdraw. Letitia read it aloud to me over the phone, then paused and said, "Baby, should I reply with kindness or with fire?" I stared out my hotel window at the morning fog, the city turning soft and silver like it was giving me a fresh page. "Reply with facts," I said. Because facts don't argue, they just stand there. So Letitia sent back copies, deed history, closing statement, notarized signatures, proof of wire transfer, proof of title transfer, and at the end, she added one clean sentence that made me laugh into my tea. "Your client's feelings are not a lien." That's the kind of line. That doesn't just end a case, it ends a delusion. Jasmine went louder after that. She posted more videos, more tears, more "I was betrayed." She wore white like she was mourning the house as if it had died, and every time she lifted that camera to her face, I could tell she wasn't grieving the loss of a home. She was grieving the loss of a storyline. The loss of the content she'd already filmed in her head. The before and after, the watch us renovate, the dream home, all those little fantasies she built on top of my roof like she was stacking blocks on someone else's table. And Fred tried the oldest trick. He tried to turn my son into a messenger. One afternoon, my boy called. His voice was strained, like he'd been holding a rope too long, and the burn was finally reaching his palms. "Mom, Dad says you're being harsh. Double quotes, harsh. That word. Like boundaries are cruelty, like consequences are violence." I didn't snap, I didn't defend myself. I just asked my son, softly, "Did he tell you he called me expired?" Silence. Then, "No." The days after that message passed, like clean pages turning, no drama. no sirens, no last-minute apologies that meant anything, just quiet. And quiet, I learned, can be louder than revenge. My furniture arrived one piece at a time. The movers were gentle, young men who called me ma'am with respect instead of pity. When they carried in my old rocking chair, the one Fred used to complain about because it creaked, I asked them to place it by the window. The river glimmered outside like it knew secrets I didn't need to ask for. I sat there the first evening, wrapped in a cardigan that still smelled faintly of lavender, and let my body rest into itself. No one needed anything from me. No one was waiting for me to fix, forgive, finance, or fade. That was when the memories started visiting, not violently, not like before. They came like old neighbors knocking softly, asking to be let in for a moment. I remembered Fred when he was young and unsure, standing in the doorway of our first apartment with nothing but a borrowed couch and big promises. I remembered how proud he'd been when I signed the papers for this house with my own money, how he'd kissed my forehead and said, "We did it, Ruthie." We. Such a small word, such a heavy lie. I didn't hate him for changing. People change. I hated him for deciding that my aging made me disposable, for believing my years were a flaw instead of proof. The nursing home came into my life unexpectedly, not because I was weak, but because I chose community over isolation. Twice a week, I volunteered there, reading, listening, sitting beside women whose stories had been erased by children who only called when they needed something signed. One afternoon, a woman named Clara took my hand and said, "They think because we're quiet, we're done." I smiled at her. "Quiet isn't done," I said. "Quiet is choosing." That night, my son came over. He stood awkwardly in my new living room, holding a bag of groceries like a peace offering. He looked around slowly, taking in the bookshelves, the plants, the framed photos I'd chosen carefully. "This feels like you," he said. I nodded. "It finally is." He hesitated, then asked the question I knew was coming. "Dad's not doing well." I waited. "He says Jasmine left. Says the money problems came out. Says he feels lost." Lost. That word used to pull me apart. This time, it didn't. "I hope he finds his footing," I said gently. My son frowned. That's it. He looked at me for a long moment, then sat down across from me like he was finally seeing the full woman, instead of the role I used to play. "I didn't protect you," he said quietly, "when I should have." I reached out, placed my hand over his. "You're here now. That counts." Tears welled in his eyes, not loud, not theatrical. "Honest, I'm proud of you," he whispered. And in that moment, something mended that revenge never could. Weeks later, I passed my old street by chance. The Petersons were on the porch, laughing, their dog tangled in its leash. The yellow paint glowed in the afternoon sun. The house looked lighter somehow, like it had exhaled. I didn't stop. I didn't wave. I just smiled and kept walking. Because closure isn't a conversation. It's a direction. At night, when the city settles and the river hums low, I sometimes think about the word he used. Expired. Milk expires. Contracts expire. Coupons expire. Women don't. We season. We deepen. We learn exactly when to be soft and when to walk away without looking back. I am not the woman I was at 30, thank God. I am not the woman I was at 50, thank God again. I am 74 years old. And I know this now with a clarity that feels like peace. Nothing that is rooted can be replaced by something that is only loud. Nothing that was built with truth can be stolen by someone who only knows how to take. And nothing's more dangerous than a woman who has finally decided to stop explaining herself. The river keeps moving. So do I, and this time, I am not fading. I am finished with disappearing. I am exactly where I belong. The days after that message passed like clean pages turning. No drama. No sirens. No last-minute apologies that meant anything. Just quiet. And quiet, I learned, can be louder than revenge. My furniture arrived one piece at a time. The movers were gentle, young men who called me ma'am with respect instead of pity. When they carried in my old rocking chair, the one Fred used to complain about because it creaked, I asked them to place it by the window. The river glimmered outside like it knew secrets I didn't need to ask for. I sat there the first evening, wrapped in a cardigan that still smelled faintly of lavender, and let my body rest into itself. No one needed anything from me. No one was waiting for me to fix, forgive, finance, or fade. That was when the memories started visiting, not violently, not like before. They came like old neighbors knocking softly, asking to be let in for a moment. I remembered Fred when he was young and unsure, standing in the doorway of our first apartment with nothing but a borrowed couch and big promises. I remembered how proud he'd been when I signed the papers for this house with my own money, how he'd kissed my forehead and said, "We did it, Ruthie." We. Such a small word. Such a heavy lie. I didn't hate him for changing. People change. I hated him for deciding that my aging made me disposable, for believing my years were a flaw instead of proof. The nursing home came into my life unexpectedly, not because I was weak, but because I chose community over isolation. Twice a week, I volunteered there reading, listening, sitting beside women whose stories had been erased by children who only called when they needed something signed. One afternoon, a woman named Clara took my hand and said, "They think because we're quiet, we're done." I smiled at her. "Quiet isn't done," I said. "Quiet is choosing." That night, my son came over. He stood awkwardly in my new living room, holding a bag of groceries like a peace offering. He looked around slowly, taking in the bookshelves, the plants, the framed photos I'd chosen carefully. "This feels like you," he said. I nodded. "It finally is." He hesitated, then asked the question I knew was coming. "Dad's not doing well." I waited. "He says Jasmine left. Says the money problems came out. Says he feels lost." Lost. That word used to pull me apart. This time, it didn't. "I hope he finds his footing," I said gently. My son frowned. "That's it. That's it." He looked at me for a long moment, then sat down across from me like he was finally seeing the full woman, instead of the role I used to play. "I didn't protect you," he said quietly, "when I should have." I reached out, placed my hand over his. "You're here now. That counts." Tears welled in his eyes, not loud, not theatrical. "Honest, I'm proud of you," he whispered. And in that moment, something mended that revenge never could. Weeks later, I passed my old street by chance. The Petersons were on the porch, laughing, their dog tangled in its leash. The yellow paint glowed in the afternoon sun. The house looked lighter somehow, like it had exhaled. I didn't stop. I didn't wave. I just smiled and kept walking. Because closure isn't a conversation. It's a direction. At night, when the city settles and the river hums low, I sometimes think about the word he used. Expired. Milk expires. Contracts expire. Coupons expire. Women don't. We season. We deepen. We learn exactly when to be soft and when to walk away without looking back. I am not the woman I was at 30, thank God. I am not the woman I was at 50, thank God again. I am 74 years old. And I know this now with a clarity that feels like peace. Nothing that is rooted can be replaced by something that is only loud. Nothing that was built with truth can be stolen by someone who only knows how to take. And nothing's more dangerous than a woman who has finally decided to stop explaining herself. The river keeps moving. So do I, and this time, I am not fading. I am finished with disappearing. I am exactly where I belong.